What's up, everybody? It's your boy Showtime Doctor. I'm back. So, I'm here with the banner review. Apologies for not getting out yesterday, but I was just amazed to do new content for a while. So, I did the whole world. I'll get my review and all that probably in the next video. The new world stuff. Not bad. Also, I'll get my review on the Advent Dungeon. Hint, it probably is not going to be a good review. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say about it yet. But anyways, we're here for the banner heroes, so let's check it out here. So, here's your banners. You got Emilia, Morgan, Ramu, and Esna. And then you also have Junia, Cynthia, my homegirl there, Demos, and Nyx. So, it's funny because most of these heroes, I think except Esna, and of course the newer heroes, they all got costumes. So it's funny that they put them all on basically two banners. But anyways, so as always, I have to freaking go over to the 6-star thing because they always show the 5-star units for some reason on the actual banners. So we got to go to the codex so I can show you how these guys actually work. Oh, one thing I should say before. Now I'll make a separate video for it. Should I? Well, yeah, I should. Sorry, I'll wait on it. So I guess I'll do the new heroes first before I get to all the on-banner heroes. So, alright, so... Oh yeah, I might as well throw in the new Advent hero, but we'll get to her later. So this is Emilia. She's actually pretty useful on the new Advent, especially for Phase 2, where there's shields. If there's any type of shield or any type of damage immunity, this is going to be your girl right here. Archmage's Apprentice, Emilia. So, let me change myself back. Alright, so let's go over it here. So her leadership, wind allies attack by 40. That's also what Callie does, oddly enough. It's kind of weird. I think that's the first time I've seen 2 SSR units with the same leadership. I've seen it with like, SR and etc. units, but whatever. Alright, so her basic passive obtains, it's called Spell Coat, obtains Engraving of Protection when attacked. Decrease damage taken by 30% and increase attack by 25% for 2 turns. Pretty strong. When the caster has Engraving of Protection when attacked, stacks up to 2 times, so she can get to damage decrease 60, increase attack by 50%. So that's pretty cool, but it disappears at the start of the next turn, which is kind of weird, just because normally when you get a stacking buff, it lasts until at least whatever conditional thing or until the end of your next turn, but it's a start of next turn, so that means the damage bonus, the only way you're going to be able to take advantage of that is apparently from counterattacking, so you got to build her counterattack. So for people who didn't see that little detail, unless it's just worded wrong because I don't have her myself, but that's what it seems like it does, so that's too bad. So bait her with some counter, in my opinion. Obtains Engraving of Protection at the start of the wave. Increased damage dealt by 150% to targets with shields or damage immunity. That buff, by the way, along with like this right here, where she does additional damage. I think it's additional damage. Yeah, it is additional damage. We'll get to that later. That's pretty freaking powerful. Like, in Phase 2 of the new Advent, she will basically take half the boss's health if the boss has a shield up and she happens to have, well, of course she's going to have her 1, so that's super strong. And she punishes shields and damage immunity. I'm guessing that this character, once you get to, we're going to start seeing her in PvP more than we're going to see Ruby from now on, because a lot of the characters that are meta in PvP right now, they have damage immunities or big fat shields or whatever, so that's pretty strong. On her 1, it's penetration damage, hunt 1 target, but if the target has damage immunity or a shield, inflicts 80% more penetration damage, so you get a 180 off of a 1, which normally not possible in most cases as a multiplier, because the max multiplier usually is 160. But then as you skill it up here, you see both go up, and eventually you're getting 260%. I had a guy yesterday when I was trying the Advents with a maxed 1, so I was hitting for 260. And yeah, we were pretty much just wrecking face anyone that had a shield. So honor 2, barrier explosion. Inflict penetration damage equal to 120% of attack to a target and 2 adjacent enemies. If the target has damage immunity or a shield, has 80% chance to cast stun for a turn. Excuse me, for each effect. So essentially it is... I thought that was a cone attack. Is it not a cone attack? Oh yeah, 2 adjacent enemies, so it's a cone attack. It would be so much nicer if it was just like a single target and then triple attack, at least for the new advent, because everyone's sand spaced. Except for phase 2, but... So if the target has damage immunity or a shield, has 80% chance to cast stun for a turn. I'm sure this is on a 3-turn cooldown, so probably when you skill it up, it's stun for 2 turns. Yeah, and 100% chance to stun, so that's pretty strong on damage immunities and shields. Once again, I forgot to mention this is a wind hybrid here. So, her 3, inflict penetration damage equal to 120% of attack to all enemies. 35% chance to cast weaken on 3 enemies to decrease target's max HP and current HP by 90% for 2 turns. So essentially this skill, it hits everybody, has a decent chance to cast weaken, which is a skill that's been becoming a little bit more and more popular. Essentially you reduce max and current health by 90%, so it's pretty much they're dead when they get hit next time for the most part. And then once you skill it up, it goes to 192 and 60% chance to cast the weaken, but it's still 2 turns, no matter what you do for the debuff. And then, yeah, so overall, this unit's actually pretty cool. I would recommend PvP, you probably want to skill up. Her 1's super strong, so if you're doing her with counter, like I was saying, her 1's going to be really good for PvE, but if you're doing PvP, you probably want to go with her 3 just because it hits everybody and it has a chance to weaken, so... You get weaken on everybody, it's pretty much GG unless they got some type of weird survival mechanic or stun or whatever the hell. So, I actually recommend this hero. I think this is actually probably the best hero of the new heroes. But... you know, we'll go over it. It's weird that she's Wiz's apprentice. It's weird how, like, they make all these characters, like, either apprentices or nurses or basically subordinates of, like, R and SR characters. It's kind of odd. Like, it would be one thing if Wiz, like, kicked ass or Dr. Morai kicked ass, but, you know, no one uses them because they basically don't, so. Alright, so next hero. So here's Junia. Now Junia's a little bit strange to me, but I'll show you why. One of the weird things too, and I guess I'll say this here really quickly and I'll go more into it in my Advent video. She's Shiloh's granddaughter. For those of you that don't know Shiloh, that's that bomb old man. I think he's an R unit actually. And Mr. Boom's kid sister. So essentially, if you bring this unit into the new Advent, normally the new Advent hero, she summons Shiloh, and Shiloh will like fucking one-shot everybody. And you can't CC him because you would have to have a way to dispel him, because he gets, what do you call it, abnormal status immunity for 5 turns, which is basically death. And you have to simultaneously dispel him and find a way to either stun him or get that 90%, what's it called, a weaken on him, and then kill him. And it's pretty fucking impossible considering how fast him and the boss lady take turns. But then if you bring her, it just summons like some little, what's it called? Like a mushroom or something. It's stupid design, but whatever. I'll get more into that later, so. Alright, so Junia, her leadership, increased wind allies critical strike damage by 30%. So, pretty strong. Critical strike damage if, you know, you're running a Cowley or a Ruby or whatever, the hero we just went over. And then Festival Prep, that's her basic passive. Decreased damage taken by 30% when the caster has Festival Prep. 50% chance to gain abnormal status immunity. Consumes festival prep at the start of the turn. Increase the caster's attack by 30% for 2 turns. By the way, if you have this hero, it raffle stomps the Advent. Not necessarily because she herself is strong, even though she is, but because the way they design the Advent is that they don't summon the buff units if she's there. So if you got one of her and you're trying to do the new Advent, work her up. Same thing with the other hero we just went over. If you happen to have both, you're going to raffle stomp it. So her 60 passive, obtain Festival Prep at the start of the wave. Festival Prep if you forgot. Decrease damage taken by 30 for her. And then 50% chance to gain abnormal status immunity. It consumes at the start of the turn to increase the caster's attack by 30% for 2 turns. 100% chance to cast Fuse on the attacker for, 480% of attack for 3 turns when the caster dies. So if she dies, big nuke goes off on, I guess, basically everybody that attacks her. As weird as that seems. So it seems like you should probably make her tanky, a little bit tanky, and then, of course, attack power. And I'm not sure, there's probably a crit component to that as well, so. Now her 1, inflict damage equal to 100% of attack to 1 target, 50% chance to inflict damage equal to 30% of all enemies adjacent to the target. So basically it has a good chance to be a cone effect. Once you level it up all the way, it gets to 85%. But pretty much, it's going to nuke pretty hard, 160, 1 target, 65% attack to, and a cone effect, 85% chance once you skill it up. Pretty good. And then on her 2, Ready Fire, it's on a 3-turn cooldown. Inflict damage equal to 10% of attack to 3 targets. 60% chance to cast Fuse for 300% of attack to 1 target for 6 turn. Obtain Festival Prep, we went over that. Ally and enemy turns are counted towards the effect and duration of Fuse. So essentially Fuse is like the ticking time bomb. But for her it actually does damage versus most of the other heroes in the game when they're in their non-advent forms. So that's pretty cool. It hits 3 targets. I'm not sure if it's a random 3 target. I think it probably is because it doesn't specifically say cone. So you target 1 person, it picks 2 others randomly, and then has a decent chance as you skill it up. It'll eventually get to 100% chance and 480 multiplier. So that's actually pretty strong. Right there. And then on her 3, your typical. Damage 300%, 1 target, 60% chance to cast Fuse for 300%. 2 adjacent enemies. So essentially you can get 3 fuses up, which is pretty strong. And of course you can go to 480 and it becomes a 100% chance. So that's going to be the skill you skill up, and then her 2 would be next. And essentially if she's getting hit, she's probably putting the big bomb fuse thing. She can put it up with her 2. And she can put it up with her 3 on 3 people. So she's super powerful as a... What makes no sense to me is why she's a wind unit. Like, that makes no sense. She should be a fire unit. I know she'd be, like, worthless, but you're talking about fireworks, and it's like, wind. What the fuck? But, in their infinite wisdom, they made her win, so whatever. So, this is actually a pretty good hero, too. This is more for a DPS hero. The only problem with her in PvP is going to be the fuse countdown. Not that it's necessarily bad. It'd actually be really good, I could see, in guild PvP. But in normal PvP, you always have Rue there to dispel, and lots of dispellers or damage immunities and stuff. So it might not necessarily be that good. But you can also get her the penetration proc. That's probably what I would do. Get her the penetration proc, and then just hope that it's going off whenever the fuse goes off, and make sure you CC Rue or kill Rue or whoever you can kill. So that's going to be a thing. But overall, she's a pretty good unit. And especially for the new Advent, she's basically almost core. Even though Emilia is the one that gives the damage buff, but Junia makes it so much easier just because, of how everything reacts to what she does in the dungeon. Now this girl, this is your new Advent hero. She's also super annoying. She's a male Punisher, so let's get into it. Increase water allies multi-strike chance by 30%. Pretty strong, especially on her. Her multis are pretty ridiculous. In the Advent, at least. Her character is a whole nother thing. So she gets 40% evasion if she has damage over time. So effectively, when you're fighting her in the dungeon, Callie, who should be pretty buff against her, actually gives her evasion, which kind of sucks. And then she gets penetration damage whenever she has a debuff. So debuff doesn't count as a dot in most cases. Who knows what they did with the advent. But a debuff is more like, you know, decreased damage, decreased defense, that type of debuff. So... And then Surprising Charm, this is her 60 passive. Increase damage to all males by 80%. Decrease all male enemies' attack by 30% by 1 turn at the start of the wave. So essentially, she's always locking males into lower attack. And she's whooping their ass, so she's basically the female Surdict at this point. Increase critical strike damage by 50% if the caster has damage over time. So once again, she's critting, damage over time gets on her. It's pretty hard, and that really sucks in the new advent, because one of the things they did in the new advent that's annoying is they stealth nerfed a lot of people. Because normally they just nerf, you know, whoever the negative heroes are on the banner. But in this case, they pretty much made her... Oh, my bad, I just noticed the capture's off. Oops. Yeah, that wasn't what I had in mind. Hold on, let me fix it. That's weird. I wonder why it ended up like that. Let me make sure the other side's okay. Alright, that's better. Alright, so. But essentially she gets dots on her, or debuffs on her, she gets buffer. And then she's whooping Mel's ass, so that's pretty strong. And especially since you can eventually get this hero to 666, that's going to be super strong. So, on her 2, Gentle Strike, or excuse me, her 1, single target, 30% chance to charm the enemy for a turn. We'll get more into the charm in my Advent dungeon review. This is a general charm, it's not the bullshit charm that's in her dungeon. So 160% and 45% chance to charm. I'm surprised I didn't give her additional charm against males, but... oh well. Inflict damage equal to 120% of attack to a target and 2 adjacent enemies. Inflicts penetration damage equal to 30% of, or excuse me, 20% of attack if the target is male. On a 4-turn cooldown. So this is like her little pirouette move. It gets to be pretty strong, actually. If there's a male, so basically there is no damage shield that can save you. You can be saved by like Abel's shield, or a shield that absorbs HP, Kane's shield. But essentially, for the most part, this is going to pretty much one-shot. In the dungeon, it's going to one-shot most males. In PvP, it just depends how strong you build her, but it's pretty damn strong, so... And then on her 3, never leave home without it. Inflicts damage equal to 120% of attack to all enemies. 45% chance to charm male targets for a turn. In her Advent, it's pretty much like a almost 100% chance to charm. But we'll get to that later. And then as you scaled up, it's going to go to 192 and 60% chance. And the charm goes to 2 turns versus 1. So pretty good, you know, if you're fighting a group of males, whatever Advent or... PvE is pretty good. To be perfectly honest, the only reason that this character is going to be good, for the most part, outside of her Advent, is because you can eventually farm enough skills to get her 666, so you can use her pretty strong on any male hero like Tayo or etc. Just because she has that decreased damage and increased damage. And I could see that being pretty strong in certain PvE aspects, but... And especially if you're in a place that has a lot of dots, so, you know, maybe Sid's dungeon, etc. She could probably wreck him pretty hard. But of course, it's pretty hard to do this dungeon compared to Sid dungeon, unless you have all the story units. But those are all the main banner heroes, excuse me. So let me look again real quick, make sure I remember everyone who's on. I know Morgan's on, Cynthia's on, Nyx is on, Demos, who wins for unanimously for worst costume ever, Esnun Ramu, okay. Alright, so we'll get to those heroes one by one. All pretty good heroes for the most part, actually. And let me get my stupid... Okay. So let's start with Morrigan. Now Morrigan, if by now you don't know who Morrigan is, she's top tier fire DPS. Very strong. She has a costume that makes her even buffer, ridiculous. But I'm just going to go over her basic. She's a good hero even without her costume. With her costume, she pretty much turns into walking death for everything that's not Tayo and a lot of water units. So her leadership, increased fire allies attack by 40%, fairly strong. Inflict damage equal to 50% chance of attack on her basic passive to a bleeding target at the start of the turn. Increases the caster's attack by 10% for 2 turns when attacking a bleeding target. So if you got someone in the party that puts bleed up besides her, that's really good for her attack. Everything that Morrigan does is attack percentage based. So always remember that. Like you'll see as we go through her kit, not only her attacks, but her debuffs and her buffs, her self buffs. Increased caster's, oh, I already said that. Stacks up to 5 times, so you can get up to 50% for 2 turns if you're constantly attacking bleeding targets on either counters or multis or single targets. Applies the status Demon Sword Bloody Petal to the caster upon killing an enemy to inflict 30% additional damage for 2 more turns. So essentially you get a kill, you get that Demon Sword Bloody Petal buff, it's 30% additional damage. Now, one of the things I did notice, and I'm going to have to check and see, say you attack, because her 2 is a cone attack, say you attack that and 2 out of the 3 people have bleed on them. I don't think you get 2 procs of the buff, unfortunately, but I'll have to check that from now on, because maybe it's changed since then. Now, at the beginning, oh, excuse me, I did 60%. She just has a 50% chance to apply Demon Sword Bloody Petal when attacking, so that's a 30% attack buff once again. Revives with 50% HP and becomes a Berserker for 3 turns upon death once per battle. So that can be pretty strong as well. If she manages to survive the 3 turns, you get control of her again. But while she's Berserking, she guarantees counter and multi. And decreased damage taken by 25% once the caster becomes a Berserker. So it's a little bit of mitigation. You can't control her. If you have her costume, you can actually control her. But, you know, it's a $20 costume, so... But in general, you know, really strong passives right here. So on her 1, you know, it's 100% attack, 35% chance to cause bleeding for 30% of attack for 2 turns. Skill that up all the way, gets to 160 and 60, 30% attack for 2 turns. Her 2 is a dispel. It can dispel most everything in the game in a cone effect. So 120% attack, target 2 adjacent enemies, 35% chance to cause bleeding for 30% of attack for 2 turns. That can go off, by the way, on a completely separate unit outside the attack, the bleed. And it removes 1 buff from the target on a 4-turn cooldown. As you skilled up, the chance to apply the bleed goes up. And then it becomes a 3-turn bleed debuff instead of a 2 with a base of 192%. And then on her 3, inflict damage equal to 300% of attack that ignores defense to 1 enemy. 60% chance to make the target unable to be revived for 2 turns. Really important in today's PvP meta. Decrease the cooldown of skill 3 by 2 turns if the attack fails to kill the target. Now, as you skill this up, before we go into what it does, the chance to make unable to be revived goes up, and the base damage eventually gets to 480. Chance goes to 85%, and unable to be revived goes to 3 turns from 2 turns when you get to level 6. Now, if you don't kill someone with this skill, you are decreasing the cooldown at first by 2 turns. You see it's a 7-turn cooldown. And then 3 turns if you get a max. Now, if you have her costume, I believe it goes to 4 turns is what people tell me. So essentially, you're going to have this every 3 turns. Possibly every 2 turns if you're running her with someone like Sid that can do cooldown reduction. So just a really strong ability. Before Eamon was in the game, this used to be basically almost a guaranteed one-shot of anyone that was a win character in PvP. Now, ever since Eamon came in, even if you one-shot, go through all their health, and even if you proc unable to be revived, Eamon Cheese gives a resolve. So unless you proc the resolve on someone else, which is usually what I do now, she won't one-shot, which sucks. And even if you proc unable to be revived, they'll just resolve and they'll go to either half health or full health. I think it's half health for Aemon's passive resolve. And, you know, there's resolve runes in the game now, so effectively it counters Morgan fairly hard, but she's still super strong. So recommended skill up her 3. After that, skill up her 2. And then her 1. Her 1's very strong, and you can actually choose her 1 over her 2, because her 1 she's going to be doing multis with and counters with. And she, once again, she gets guaranteed multi and counter when she's berserk, so that can be super strong. So possibly, yeah, maybe just skill up her 1 after her 3, but definitely get her 3 first. Weak units she's weak to. She's pretty weak to Tayo. Tayo will fucking wreck her. Esna hits her pretty hard. Verdandi, you know, the typical water units. Another Morgan. Cynthia actually wrecks her pretty good. Because Cynthia blocks all her buffs. So. And we'll get to Cynthia later, so let's get back. Oh, actually, Nyx is on the banner too. So Nyx is a unique unit. She just got a costume. And, excuse me, she made her more ridiculous in PvP. As funny as it sounds. So, Nyx is a member of, well, the Drayden Elite, but she's also a member of the Curse meta team in PvP. She's actually probably the most important unit in the Curse PvP team because, well, we'll go over it here, but she's really strong. If you're thinking about building that Curse meta team, before we go over it, is your choice of Decane or Sinclair, possibly both if you want to do that. Get Cheshire, Nyx. You can get Mary if you want, but she's not quite as strong. And then you could get, trying to think who another one would be. But basically your 5th hero is just someone that can run interference. So it could be Claude with taunt runes. It could be Aemon with taunt runes, etc. You just need someone to delay for about 2 turns. And Nyx is going to ridiculously put up endless shields. She can AoE. Every character in those groups has a 5-person attack. And if you manage to get Nyx to go last, and there's a bunch of debuffs and curses and whatever, what have you up, she punishes you. In fact, I'll show you. She punishes you for every curse and every debuff that's on you. So increase Dark Ally's attack by 40, pretty strong. 50% chance to increase the caster's attack by 10% for 2 turns if an ally skill applies a debuff. So like I'm saying, if you got your whole team going before her in PvP, this could be at 50% with the rate that all of them are doing AoE attacks, 5-person attacks usually. If an ally skill applies a debuff, stacks up to 5 times, 60% chance to remove a debuff from the caster when attacked. And that's actually fairly strong. You'll see why in a second, the remove debuffs on her. Now, 60 passive, 100% chance to cast Veil of Phantasm on the caster for 1 turn at the start of the wave. Veil of Phantasm, it's basically a one-time dodge shield that dodges anything you can hit her, no matter what. It can be dispelled, but, I mean, to dispel it, you have to hit her, so it's basically the same as, you know what I mean, so. 100% chance to inflict damage equal to 80% of attack to the target and 2 adjacent enemies when attacking a cursed target. So you see there, if you get curse on somebody, even if it's only on this slot 2 and 4 of the hero, she can still hit everybody. Just because she can hit all the adjacent enemies. So God forbid you get 4 or 5 curses up and she goes, she will just fucking destroy your team. You know, assuming that she's gemmed right for attack and crit or whatever you want. Probably those turn 1, your multi-attacks hit 50% harder or whatever that rune set is. So, super strong there. And then also this Veil actually makes it so that she can't be one-shot. So like you couldn't just focus her with like Morgan or someone like that. You'd have to go through Veil first, which is going to waste valuable time, unfortunately. Even if you get attack speed that's faster in PvP. So on her 1, inflict damage equal to 70% attack to 2 enemies, 35% chance to cast Curse, and inflicts damage equal to 30% of attack for 2 turns. So if people choose to attack her and you have some counter on her, There's a chance that she's going to put up a curse anyways, just because it's a double attack. And once you skilled up, double attack to 112%, which is pretty strong. 60% chance to cast the curse. On her 2, inflict damage equal to 200% of attack to one enemy. 100% chance to brand the target for 2 turns. 70% chance to decrease the target's turn speed for 2 turns, basically, on a 3-turn cooldown. So that's super strong as a dark attack unit. And then the more you get it up, the damage multiplier eventually goes to 320. Brand's 100% once you get to skill 6. 100% chance on decreasing target speed, so that's a pretty good, if for whatever reason you can't kill people with your first attack, this is pretty good to slow down whatever's left. And not only that, but to debuff them pretty, you get brand on them, and you're hitting them for 320% multiplier, so this is a super amazing skill. On her 3, inflict damage, this is her bread and butter skill right here in PvP. Inflict damage equal to 120% of attack to all enemies, 50% chance to cast curse on 2 enemies to inflict damage equal to 30% of attack for 2 turns. So when you do this, you know, this should be the thing you skill up first. Goes to 192%, 80% chance to cast curse on 2 enemies, 30% of her attack damage. Her attack should be really high, her crit chance should be really high, and anything that amps this attack along with the curse. You know, you can even give her those runes. I believe it's a 2-set that when there is a dot on, she does 30% more damage. Or you can give her ones that do the debuff one, because also she punishes when there is debuffs up. Am I wrong about that? I might be wrong about that. Okay, my bad. I'm probably wrong about that. Oh yeah, because it's allies debuff, so forget that one. But yeah, the dot one would work better, because curse is a dot technically. So you can get an extra 30% attack out of that, and I believe that's a 2-set. So Nyx is super good, actually pretty slept on. If you manage to put together the curse meta team, you will laugh at pretty much every team in PvP, because the only teams at that point that are going to be able to beat you are teams with more attack speed that do as much damage as your team, because the curse team's actually fairly squishy, but they hit hard as fuck, dude. And every one of those members, Decane, Sinclair, they have so many ways to just get you killed. And Cheshire's putting up, every time she crits, she's putting up those dodge shields. Nyx starts off with the dodge shield, and then you run someone like Eamon that just gives you enough interference for 1 or 2 turns that, you know, Cloud's actually probably better on offense. It's just you never know what his defensive AI is going to do. But so Nyx is a pretty good hero. Not you have to have her, you know, but she's pretty good. Skill up her 1, or excuse me, her 3, then skill up her 2. Counters to Nyx. Pretty much Ruby's going to dispel any buff on her. Cynthia blocks buffs, so once again, Cynthia's pretty good against her. And Cynthia blocks buffs for attack and defense characters for the most part, unless it's a buff that cannot be dispelled, which I think is dumb. They recently changed that, or maybe not changed it, but they clarified it. And then, you know, your light hard-hitting heroes like Christian, etc. So, alright, so let's go to, we got some other heroes. I believe Ramu was one of them. So Ramu, good support, really good for the current advent, by the way. The cool thing about Ramu, she also got another costume, by the way, that actually borderline makes her broken. Honestly, but we won't go over that. So her leadership, when in water allies, max HP by 20. Really good if you're new to the game and you're doing the Tayo dungeon. But she's also really good in the new Advent dungeon as well. Her basic passive, restore 10% all allies HP at the end of the turn. Super fucking strong, by the way. That's actually really good if you can get her. Just really good, especially the more health people have, the harder it's healing. Her 60 is a self-revive. It was that time period when Netmarble gave everyone self-revives, which I think they did way too much of, but oh well. But still really good for her. Number 1, inflict damage equal to 100% of attack, 20% chance to stun. You scale this up, it actually gets to a pretty healthy 35% chance. If you run her like counter, like for her 2-set, that stun can be super fucking annoying because it goes through even like damage immunities and able shield, etc. So that can actually be pretty strong. Honor 2, restore all allies' HP by 20% and decrease their debuff duration for 1 turn. By 1 turn, rather, on a 4-turn cooldown. Now, the heal's never going to be amazing, it's 40%, but the decreased buff duration by 2, that's actually super strong right there. Because effectively, a lot of debuffs in the game are 2 turns, so if you can effectively get rid of it, of course everything but Looming Death, because Looming Death you don't want to speed up. So, and then Star of Hope, this is a multi-revive other than Sid, and there might be like 1 or 2 other heroes, but it's basically the only multi-revive in the game other than Sid. And it's on a 7-turn cooldown, but the higher you get it, it gets to 70% health from 40% health. And the cool thing is, you get it all the way to level 6, she revives 3 allies. So, that's the most allies you can revive that I know of in the game. So she's just a super solid character, pretty good character. You can get her from Night Selector tickets, which actually I don't think they've been putting too many in lately. It's usually just a random SSR now. But overall, really good unit, so if you get her. She's classified as a hybrid too, which is, I guess, is technically what the healers, like pretty much all the healers are in this game. But she's Wind, she's hybrid, she's pretty strong. So probably about a half step back from top tier support. But I wouldn't say that she's bad in any way. She's really good. The only thing that holds her back really is she's just not as versatile as Rue or Sid as far as damage mitigation or stupid revive heal cheese. But overall, she's a great hero. So if you get her, love her, hug her, make her feel at home. Was Demos one of the new units? I think he was. Let me go check again. Yeah, great. Alright, so we'll get into Demos. Demos, by the way, wins, once again, for worst character uniform in the game. I will actually put it up here this whole time. That has to be the worst fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, okay, if you're gonna be a white mage, and you're gonna have wings, have some real fucking wings. Like, what is that? That looks like he went to Kmart and got, like, the blue light special in the kids section. Like, that's some horrible shit. And then his belt looks like, you know, some guys that made their first game. And, hey guys, we're making our first indie game. Like, that looks fucking horrible. This is the worst art I've ever seen in the game, overall. Which is weird, because normally he has pretty good, or excuse me, the game has really good art. And then, like, if you hit this angle, if you notice, his shoe kind of turns green. So, I don't know, but I could go over that all day, but whatever. Alright, so Demos, he's pretty underrated. I got one recently. Helps me get through the Nikita dungeon. So I'll give you the ins and outs on him. Oh, I forgot to mention on Ramuh. Skill up, it's your choice of her 2 or 3. Whether debuffs are more important to you or reviving with higher health is more important to you. So, now, passive, increase water ally and dark allies recovery amount by 20%. You know, fairly strong. 1, 50% chance to obtain a black prayer when using a skill. If there are 3 or more black prayers at the end of a turn, consume all black prayers to restore all allies' HP by 20% and decrease the buff duration of 2 random enemies by 1. So this is a lot of stuff happening. But essentially he has a self-stacking buff that if he gets 3 of them, it heals your team for 20 and it decreases buff duration for 2 random enemies by 8 turns. So it's pretty RNG. Yeah, kind of weird, but it does help. So on his 2... Hidden Darkness revives the dead ally as a Dark Warrior with 70% HP, increase their attack by 30% for 2 turns. So this is an involuntary revive on his 60. So Dead Warrior basically means they're immune to abnormal statuses like stun or taunt. And he also gives them an attack buff, so that's pretty strong actually. Now, on his 3... And yes, this is a guy. Or excuse me, his 3, lol. Let me go to his 1 first. Inflict damage equal to 100% of attack to 1 target. 25% chance to remove 1 buff from the target. Actually feels like that procs at like a 40 to 50% rate. But 5% health restore on ally with lowest health. Additional 5% if caster is water. So that's pretty cool. Or excuse me, if ally is water. Of course the caster is water. And then as you skill that up, base damage goes up, chance to remove buffs goes up, and the percentage restored goes up until you get the 10%, 160 base damage, and 40% chance to remove a buff. So that's actually a very underrated skill because it's a double heal for water, and the removal of the buff, which can be really strong, especially if you have with multi or counter. So that's pretty good. Now in its 2, this is the Dark Warrior thing. Increase all allies allies attack by 30% for 2 turns. Removes all debuffs. It doesn't work on things like Defense Crush, so not quite every debuff, but a lot of debuffs. And the target becomes a Dark Warrior and is immune to abnormal statuses. So like I said, stuns, taunts, stuff like that, it's not going to affect them. And then as you skill it up, it can go to 3 turns as a buff, and the attack buff goes to 50%. On a 3-turn cooldown, so that's pretty strong actually, considering it stays for 2 turns. And then the buff itself can stay, the attack buff can stay for 3 turns. So essentially, if you get this skilled up, you can always have an ally hitting 50% harder. Very underrated actually. Very underrated in PvE. Now, his 3 is essentially a big evade shield with a big heal on it. All allies HP by 35%, 100% chance to cast Veil of Phantasm to evade attack for a turn, 7-turn cooldown. As you skill it up, the HP restored goes up, and eventually Veil of Phantasm would last for 2 turns, but that sounds better than it is because it only evades attack once. If it evaded attack for 2 turns, he'd be borderline broken probably, so... you skill this up basically if you want the fatter heal. Otherwise, to be perfectly honest, I recommend skilling up the 2. Because you should have, if you're running Demos, you should have another healer in the party, most likely, so they'll cover the majority of the healing duty. And then you probably want to skill up his 2, unless you're doing maybe Demos is your only healer, then okay, yeah, you can probably consider leveling this up for the fatter heal. But otherwise, like I'm saying, I would level up his 2. Now weaknesses, pretty much any wind hero. Ruby, Callie, the new ones that just came out, etc. They're all going to wreck him pretty hard. But he's a really good hero. Actually pretty underrated. He's not top tier support, but he's, I'd say, about a step behind, only because he doesn't have an on-demand res, which is Netmarble has made super important in these games because of how they balance the dungeons. Now, let's go ahead. We'll go find all the other heroes that are on the banners. Esna's one of them. So Esna's pretty good. She used to be top tier water support for a while. And then Tayo came out and pretty much wrecked that. But Netmarble does have a consistency of nerfing Tayo in all the advents lately. So Esna actually becomes more useful in those cases, although she's not necessarily optimal for the new advent. But we'll get into her kit here. So Brain Boost, increase water allies attack by 60% if the party has 5 water heroes. Pretty strong if you can field 5 water heroes. Esna's Revenge. Esna's Revenge is basically a 50% chance when she is hit to have her next attack be an auto crit. So because of this, you do not want to ruin her counter because you want that auto crit to go off on her 3 and her 2. We'll get more into that later. Restores HP by 30% if the caster's HP is below 30% at the end of the turn. Very underrated ability. Most people actually sleep on that. So basically, you should probably give her a little bit of health on her 2 set because you don't have to ruin for crit chance because she has Esna's Revenge. And the higher that her base health is, the more that this is going to restore at the end of her turn. So that actually helps mitigate, like, if you got 2 heroes on your team and one of them's her that are under 30%. In most cases, Esna's going to heal herself up at the end of her turn, so you can go ahead and heal the other person, assuming they don't have a similar mechanic going on. Now, all of her attacks penetrate. That's the good part about Esna. So her 1, it's your basic 1 target, but it gets to 160%. Her 2, the cool thing about her 2 is the more buffs and debuffs the target has, the harder it hits. So if you manage to get 8 of each, doesn't matter what combination, this hits super fucking hard, so it gets pretty crazy. Basically, inflict damage equal to 110% of attack to 3 targets. Inflicts penetration damage equal to 30% of attack if the target has a buff. And inflicts penetration damage equal to 30% if the target has a debuff. Now, make sure you're reading this correctly. Her base damage does not penetrate. Unless they misworded that. But the additional effects do. So if you have someone like, say, a Christian or a Sid or someone that puts up a lot of buffs, you know, you could run Esna with freaking Cynthia, because Cynthia's going to put up Melancholy, blocks the buffs, but then Esna still does full fucking damage with this. She has, if there are 8 buffs or debuffs up, or any combination of, 110% base damage on 3 targets, and up to 240% penetration damage. This is a very underrated skill because as you skill it up, all those multipliers go up until it gets to 45%. Now, 45% times 8, you are looking at 360% damage on top of a 176% base. 360 plus 176, and granted it's not all penetration damage, but 360 plus 176, 470, or excuse me, 4... Shoot, I totally just lost all the numbers. 360. Okay, so 476, 536% damage. And granted, most things aren't going to have 8 buffs and debuffs, but if you can do it, her 2 hits super fucking hard, so keep that in mind when you're using her, because I notice most people don't even pay attention to that. You know, run her with some debuffers. Now on her 3, this is the skill we're all here for. Increased damage equal to 300% of attack to 1 target. 100% chance to apply Mental Seal. Mental Seal... The way that they word this is weird. That's not quite how it works. But, okay, so what happens is 300% base attack, right? Mental Seal basically is... If you've been in Sid's dungeon and seen Engulfing Darkness, you know what Mental Seal does. But essentially, it is a debuff that goes up on the target. And if you get it maxed all the way, it's 3 turns and 480. But essentially... anytime they act, even if it's on a counter, a multi, etc., they're taking 50% of their life if they do anything but defend. And of course, in PvP, maybe with smart AI, they'll defend now with it up, but for the most part, they always try to perform some action unless they're stunned or charmed or whatever. So this is super strong in PvP most of the time, and it doesn't work as well in PvE, but it still has its uses, usually on the first boss of most advents, you can use Mental Seal. And, you know, fairly strong. You can actually use it on phase 2 in Christian's dungeon, but you have to be careful with it because of the way that that phase works. But it's on a 5-turn cooldown, and it can be super strong. So I recommend skilling up, as much as I talked up her 2, you know, skill up her 3 just for the hard 480 when you can get it, and then skill up her 2 after that. But she's super strong. She's maybe a half step or so away from top tier. The only thing that really holds her back is you can't get her 666 unless you pull 15 copies of her on top of her. So 16 total copies. So that's pretty crazy. But she's a good hero. Good solid hero. So if you get her and you need some water deeps, really good in Nikita's dungeon. So, and then I'm trying to remember all the other heroes that were on the banner. Oh yeah, Cynthia. Okay, we'll go over her. So Cynthia is actually my favorite character in the game. I just got her new outfit, by the way. It's just her basic 7%, but look how cute she looks. You know, pretty cool. So anyway, Cynthia is very underrated. Even in PvE, a lot of people sleep on her because most people like to run Rue. Rue is pretty much screws up Cynthia's damage potential. But let me go over here what happens. So Uh, her leadership is basically an all ally attack. So, 20%. You really only do this if, you're running a team full of mishmash characters, like it's your very last team in guild PvP or something, then you can put that up. The Castigator, now pay attention. 80% chance to apply Melancholy to attack type enemies at the start of the wave. 80% chance at the start of the turn for 2 turns as well, so that's pretty strong. Melancholy, for those who don't know, it blocks buffs. So not that the buffs can't go on the character, but it basically makes it so that they're worthless. So damage, shields, attack bonuses, etc. It's all doesn't matter as long as Melancholy's on them. Now Melancholy can be dispelled, but as long as that's on them, it's pretty strong. She nerfs attack characters really hard. Now decrease damage taken by 40% when attacked by an enemy affected by Melancholy. So it's a little bit of mitigation for her. Excuse me. 2, Silent Time. This is what makes her right here. All attacks become critical strikes, so you don't have to gem her or rune her for critical strike at all. Chance. When the caster is silenced. So she herself is silenced, and more on that later. Increase multi-strike chance by 75% and counters attack chance by 75%. So you don't have to rune her for critical strike chance. You don't have to rune her for multi-strike or counter chance, as long as she's silenced. Okay? Now, 80% chance to silence the attacker for 1 turn when attacked. So if she gets attacked, she survives. She silences the attacker. Silence makes it so that you can only use your skill 1, so that can be really strong as well. So she's basically just like a gigantic debuffer, and she hits, she multis, she counters at max rates, because 75% is the max rate for pretty much every character. She was broken for a bit. She could get 100 if you stacked it on her, but that has since been patched. Now her 1 is her most important skill, guys, so this is a flip for most characters in this game. Inflict damage equal to 100% of attack that ignores defense. So once again, highest chance to multi and counter. All attacks become critical strike when silenced. Her 1 ignores defense. So if you put all that together, the only thing that can stop her at that point is damage shields, which you can give her the talent to proc, I think on a 20% chance, penetration when she's hit. So, which is what I gave her. A 25% chance to silence the target for a turn, 60% chance to silence the target for 1 turn if the caster is silenced. So essentially, you skill this up, her base damage goes up, the chance to silence goes up on both things until it gets to 80% if she's silenced, 40% if she's not. And you want this base damage to be as high as possible, because her skill 1 hits hard as fuck, because she auto-crits, she ignores defense, she multis, she counters. If the person is silenced, she's going to silence them again, and even if they're not silenced, she has a chance. And she's blocking buffs, which means she's blocking defensive buffs, damage shields, etc. Anything that can help mitigate or make that character buffer. So she is a terror in PvP if you see her and you're running her effectively. Now her 2 inflicts penetration damage equal to 80%, all enemies, and silences her for a turn. And it's on, if you notice, a 1-turn skill cooldown. The only reason it's on a skill cooldown of 1 turn is because she's silenced, so she couldn't cast it anyways most of the time. And as you skill this up, the base damage goes up, but it's not worth investing in right away. You want to skill up her 1 over everything. Now her 3, this is really cool, strictly because it silences her for 3 turns. So inflicts penetration damage equal to 165% of attack to 3 enemies. Silences the caster for 3 turns. Inflicts 30% additional damage if there is only 1 target. So that can be nice, but it does a pretty good damage, especially if you can get like a Christian's 2-up that guarantees automatic crit. This skill can actually hit pretty hard since it's penetration. But the reason you do it though is the silence. You need her to be silenced for 3 turns. You do that immediately at the beginning of the turn, unless by some miracle she gets silenced some other way. And then you just use her 1, rinse and repeat. She's going to auto-crit multi most of the time. And she counters most of the time whenever she's hit. So she's just super effing strong. The problem is you can't run her with Rue because Rue auto dispels the silence, and you have to be careful who you run her with that has auto dispel because you do not want the silence to get taken off. So like if she's low and Sid counters with a bird, Sid will take the silence off. I actually had it one time. I tested it. I think it cost me a PvP match. She had 2 other debuffs in the silence up. And one of the debuffs, I think, was Looming Death, and I had no way to get rid of it, so I chanced it with a Sid Bird, and of course, didn't remove Looming Death, didn't remove whatever the other debuff was, remove the silence, so it was fucking stupid. I was trying to save her, but she's super strong. Pair her with a character that increases fire damage, and even like someone like Demos, anyone that can give her attack buff. Leafa is pretty good for that. Or if you can get anything that, you know, help keep her alive, help protect her, you know, like Aemon or whatever, get her resolve. Just get her something that's going to keep her up even in PvP. Now weaknesses, you know, Tayo. Any water hero that hits really hard. She is vulnerable to hybrids actually, because she can melancholy any attack unit. But hybrids and like any like defensive hero, like if you get her with aim and 3 before she even takes a turn, then she can't silence herself with 3, so she has to 2. So that makes her a little bit less effective. And then also if you get Aemon's 2 off and she hits either her 2 or her 3, she's going to eat a lot of counter attacks. So you got to be aware of that. But overall, she's just as good as Morgan in my opinion, except for you can't run her with Rue really. But she's super good, so highly recommend getting her. And am I done? I think I'm done. And I apologize guys, that was actually a pretty long video, but it is 2 banners. Yeah, I got everybody, so I'm done. So alright guys, so this has been your banner review for the new banners. Pretty much all the heroes are worth it for different ways. Recommend if you're going to do the dungeon, even though Junia gives, or not Junia, sorry, Emilia gives the damage bonus. What I recommend is pull for Junia, because A, you're also going to get Cynthia, which is pretty cool, but Junia nerfs the new advent so hard it's not even funny, and you can just run a friends Emilia, or vice versa. You can do it the other way around as well. I unfortunately do not have any of the banner units, so I'm pretty much unable to beat the advent right now. Consistently. I haven't even beat it once yet, but I'm sure once I skill up certain heroes I can do it, but more on that in the next video. So alright guys, so I'm Showtime Doctor, Showtime DR. You found my YouTube. If you enjoyed the content, please consider hitting the like button. I'm also on Twitch, twitch.tv/ShowtimeDR. Check the title notes. There's a link there for that, along with my Discord. We got a Knights Chronicle tab. We got a lot of game communities going on in the Discord, so it's pretty fun in there, anime heads, etc. Feel like coming in. Really enjoyed meeting a lot of you. And that is it for me. I will catch you guys later on. Peace.